Nothing gets people quite as heated as elections, be it a good or bad outcome. But this isn't an isolated American experience, as so many around me might assume. This year, over 64 countries and around 2 billion people will have been eligible to take part in an election of some kind. Welcome to the Just Dumb Enough podcast, a show that acknowledges no one is always an expert by dispelling misconceptions with real experts. I'm your host as always, Colton Petrie. My guest today is Sam Daley-Harris. Sam has been lobbying for voter advocacy for over 4 decades and loves to educate on how we can do better than electing a total stranger to represent us with no supervision. He'll teach us how to ask for what you want, get meetings with these important people, and make sure your desires aren't drowned out by so much social noise. Let's have a say again. Welcome to the show, Sam Daley-Harris.
Great to be here.
Yeah, so excited to have you. Why don't you introduce yourself a little bit for the audience?
Well, if I could, there's a certain way I introduce myself that I urge folks to listen to and think about their way of introduction. It's called the story of self. It was developed by Harvard professor Marshall Gans, and it basically asks, what happened in your life and what decisions did you make that got you to this moment or this commitment? So this is my story of self. And I urge people to think about their own. I have a bachelor's degree and a master's degree in music. And I played percussion instruments in the Miami Philharmonic Orchestra for 12 years and taught high school music. And 44 years ago, I founded the Anti-Poverty Lobby. Results. And a lot of times I'm asked, music, poverty lobby, what's the connection? And when I look back in my life, there's certain experiences that start pointing me in a different direction. The death of a friend around high school graduation in 1964, the assassination of U.S. Senator Robert Kennedy around college graduation in 68, got me to asking the questions of purpose. Why am I here? What am I here to do? What's my purpose? 9 years later, 1977, I'm invited to a presentation on ending world hunger put on by the Hunger Project. And I go to this thing thinking, well, hunger's inevitable. What do I know? I'm a musician. Well, I mean, it's inevitable in my mind because there are no solutions, I guess. Because if there were solutions, somebody would have done something by now. But I go to this event and it's obvious right away. There's no mystery to growing food, clean water, basic health. I'm not hopeless about the perceived lack of solutions. I'm hopeless about human nature. People will just never get around to doing the things that can be done. But there's one human nature I have some control over, my own, and my questions, why am I here? What am I here to do? So I get involved in a big way. This is the end of the story. In 1978, 1979, I spoke to 7,000 high school students, classroom by classroom, on ending world hunger. And before I went into the first classroom, I read some statements from Jimmy Carter's Commission on World Hunger and others calling for the political will to end hunger. So I asked 7,000 high school students, what's the name of your member of Congress? I don't want to know if you wrote him. I don't want to know if you met him. Just the name. Out of 7,000 asked, I don't know if you know this answer, actually, the number that could answer correctly was 200, fewer than 3%. 6,800, over 97%, couldn't tell me the name of their member of Congress. And results, this anti-poverty lobby I founded 44 years ago grew out of this gap between the calls for the political will to end hunger on the one hand and the lack of basic information on who represented us in Washington on the other. So that's a kind of an unusual introduce yourself, but that is my story of self. And I urge listeners to think about where they are in their life and what happened and what decisions they made that got them to listening to this podcast and or whatever else is important in their lives.
Certainly. Well, and it's one of those questions that's like, how many people listening knows who represents them, not even just US Congress, like wherever you're at in the world, who is your representative?
Yeah,
Do you
exactly.
know? Like, are you sure?
Exactly. Exactly. It's a long story I may tell later, but I read a lot of articles and I respond to the journalists. And there's a columnist in the Boston Globe who wrote a column last year. It was titled, "You Can Name the Three Stooges. Can you name your three members of Congress?" For my daughter's generation, you can name three Taylor Swift songs. Can you name your three members? We just probably can't in most cases.
Yeah, I know. I'm like, you're as soon as you're like, name the Three Stooges. I'm like, Larry,
Well,
Moe, and Curly. And the same thing, like Taylor Swift songs, like, yeah, sure, we can all do that. It really seems like one of these things that we take a bit for granted, where we're saying, like, well, I know somebody does that job. It's like, okay, well, if you're over 18, elected someone to do that job, hopefully. Like, if you voted, you actually decided who is representing you in some way, shape, or form.
I have a friend who puts it this way. It's like you hired someone to do work for you, and then you left them there with no supervision. You probably wouldn't do that. And we kind of leave them there with no supervision, whether it's a member of parliament in other countries or whatever.
Is there a reason that we don't pay any attention to that? Because I'd imagine some people might say, like, well, I voted for a person and they didn't win, so I don't want to pay any attention to it. To which I would say, like, well, then maybe you should pay extra attention because the guy or girl you agreed with more didn't win. Like, maybe now you should be watching extra closely.
Yeah.
Or, just to say, like, some people might think, well, all of them are the same and none of the results are going to change no matter what. So why would I care?
Right. And
Like,
I think the bottom line of what you're saying and that people are thinking is it wouldn't make a difference. My paying attention, what can I do? It really doesn't matter. If I can, I'm going to share this. I did some national public radio in the United States interviews, and I want to read you question number 2 on this show called 1A, which goes to hundreds of stations in the United States. Question number 2, this is what he said. He said, and I think he was speaking for all of us, whatever the country. He said, the passive nature to our politics now, you can feel beat down by it. I mean, this is my career and I feel beat down by it. It's much more of an effort for me. I don't participate the same way others do because I'm a political journalist, but I do have to pay attention. It's a grind. It's a grind, Sam. I mean, I know you know that. What am I feeling? What is a way out of that? And it was like so in my face, the kind of hopelessness and discouragement. First thing that I said to him was, Apollo astronaut Rusty Schweikert said, we aren't passengers on Spaceship Earth. We're the crew. Well, are we? And if we're crew, how does crew operate? Quite differently than passengers. The second thing I said was futurists and climate activists, Alex Steffen said, in fact, these days, cynicism is obedience. Well, yeah, if I'm cynical, I'm obedient to the way things are. I'm not going to do anything about it. Why would I if nothing I do makes a difference? So I think all of that is kind of part of what's in the air and in our minds, consciously or subconsciously.
certainly. Well, and I think a lot of people have that, like, well, I feel negatively about it. I'm being cynical, or I openly say that, like, I dislike politics. So they must feel that somewhere deep inside and they know how upset we are. It's like they don't care because you're not actually doing anything. You're just saying aloud, like, I'm unhappy, which has almost zero effect.
Yes, yeah, in fact. And so getting to the what can I do about it? There's no role for me. The main idea in my book, Reclaiming Our Democracy, is transformational advocacy. And I make the distinction between what we all know, transactional advocacy, sign the petition, transaction complete, and transformational advocacy, where you're trained, encouraged, and succeed at doing things you never thought you could do, like meet with an elected official and bring them on board to your issue, or write a letter to the editor on an issue you care about and have it published. And when you do those things you never thought you could do, you see yourself differently. You see yourself in a new light. A transformation has taken place. And so I urge people to consider getting involved with an organization, there aren't a lot of them, that delivers transformational advocacy instead of email petitions to sign.
Well, let's talk a bit about transactional just for a second so that people are aware of how this may have worked, or, why it doesn't really work, or whatever it might be. Because I think all of us at one point in time have signed something to say like yes or no, like, sure, here's my name, but we don't really know what that does.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, so let me give you some stats, just two, maybe three quick ones. The Congressional Management Foundation in the US did a survey of grassroots advocacy professionals, staff who work with volunteer members, and they asked them, what is your primary tactic? And 79% of grassroots advocacy staff, 79% said an email form letter. Give me your name and zip code or postcode in another country, and we'll send the letter for you. 79% said an email form letter was their primary tactic, but only 3% of congressional staff said an email form letter was highly effective in their office's decisions. 94% said an in-person issue visit by constituents, that's people who live in the district, in-person issue visit by constituents made some or a lot of difference, 94%. And so when you get a barrage of letters that all are the same, that it only took click, that was it, that's all it took, and whoever did click probably isn't paying attention after the click, you can be pretty safe in ignoring it largely.
Well,
And
yeah.
so, yeah.
I mean, think about like the last thing that you signed as a group. How many times have you heard back from them to say like, oh, hey, here's the follow-up, or, oh, hey, they didn't listen to us, we need to say something else.
Yes.
How into that are you? Like, I've
Yes.
never heard back from any of that.
Well, and then you either don't hear back or you hear back, but it's not related to what you wrote about, kind of thing. So, yeah. And so that's why, and I'm going to just dig in a little deeper on this transformational advocacy. And what is it that an organization that delivers transformational advocacy does? What do they do in a sense that's different than others? There are three things. One, recruitment and community building. Recruitment, bringing new people in, not just to build an e-blast list, but to form a local chapter so you're not working alone. And community building is like, if it's a national group, a monthly webinar with guest speakers, Q&A, inspiration. So recruitment and community building, that already eliminates most groups that don't do the community building. Two, training. How do you get the meeting with the elected official? How do you plan for the meet? What do you ask for in the meeting? How do you write a letter to the editor? Two, training. Three, breakthroughs. The organization encourages you to have breakthroughs. There's a drawing in the book, a small circle labeled your comfort zone. And next to it is a much larger circle labeled where the magic happens. Well, you're looking for an organization that doesn't kick you out of your comfort zone, but encourages you to write that letter to the editor and trains you how, or encourages you to have that meeting with the elected official. And so those are the things that these groups do that deliver transformational advocacy: recruitment and community building, training, and encouraging breakthroughs. A lot of groups don't do that. And I think in the program notes, there'll be a link where you could let your listeners can let me know that they'd like to be connected with a group that delivers transformational advocacy.
Certainly, it will be in the show notes. So if you drop down into the show notes, it'll be right there. There's a link that'll help fill out a form, right? And you'll actually get some responses that are helpful. But it feels like, trying to build this community, trying to get answers, trying to really like dig into things. It sounds like what most people ask for is they're like, I miss the town hall format. And you're like, well, this is that. Like, we're going to show up and have group discussions and group question and answer, and we're all in this.
And we're going to make plans for that meeting with them or for that event that we're going to table at and bring new people in. So, yeah, if I can, I'm going to tell that I got a couple of stories, but I was just finishing a column. There's a democracy newsletter called The Fulcrum. And in the column, I talked about in 2019, President Trump called for a 29% cut to the global fund to fight AIDS, tuberculosis, and malaria, which is a global work. And but in 2019, or a couple of years before, the global fund had saved 38 million lives. So he called for a 29% cut, and the global fund was about to have a 3-year replenishment. And most people didn't know that the president called for this cut. And if they did, they'd probably throw up their hands in despair. What can you do? You can't fight City Hall. I can't do anything about it. Well, the folks I know roll up their sleeves and got to work and got hundreds of members of Congress, Republicans and Democrats, to co-sponsor resolutions in the House and Senate and to sign letters to the Secretary of State and the top appropriators in the committees in support of the Global Fund. And when I do these talks that I do, I said, what do these revolutionary volunteer advocates look like? And then I have them look around the room because they look a lot like you do. And I flash this photo on the screen of a volunteer from Dallas, Texas, holding Senator Ted Cruz's hand with two hands. And she said to me, I learned in results, I hold the senator's hand with two hands, and I don't let go until I finish my laser talk on the Global Fund to fight AIDS, tuberculosis, and malaria. Well, that year was the first time Senator Cruz ever said yes to one of their requests, and he co-sponsored the Senate resolution supporting the Global Fund. And later that year, 2 House Republicans and 2 House Democrats stood on a stage in Lyon, France at the Global Fund replenishment and announced the Congress would provide a 16% increase to the Global Fund to fight AIDS, tuberculosis, and malaria. And President Trump signed that into law. By 2022, the Global Fund partnership had saved 59 million lives between 2002, when it was launched, and 2022. It's an example of ordinary folks. That year in Texas, they'd had 40 meetings with legislators or their staff. They'd had 25 letters, op-eds, and editorials published in the newspapers, but they didn't do it alone. And they got trained. They did things that they never thought they could do.
Well, and I think a lot of this is putting things into perspective, right? Like, if your representative looks at something and just says, okay, this will save X amount of money. Okay, we're going to save X amount of money. On paper, looks good. Like, everybody loves saving money.
Yeah.
But if you represent it like, passing this bill will cost X amount of lives, to say like, okay, well, what's 30% of whatever we did in the last year? Like, that's how many lives it will cost.
Yeah.
Then you're much more likely to be like, oh, well, then we should probably do this.
Yeah.
Because we hear a lot of things every day. I mean, especially here in the US, where we're like X amount of dollars going to somewhere. And we're like, well, I'd like X amount of dollars. Why doesn't it come to me?
Yeah.
And I think it's because it's not framed in the other way. It's not framed in the way that like is actually helpful to know. We just hear money values and we're like, well, I don't want money anywhere else.
Yeah. But also, I think we feel pain about the loss of lives around the world. And we're always looking at the the lives lost and not sure where we can step in and help with the lives saved. And I'll just add this. I founded this anti-poverty lobby results 44 years ago. Over the last 40 years, we've lobbied on child survival every year. Kids are and were dying of measles, coupled with malnutrition, really simple preventable things. Well, the global child deaths over the last 40 years have fallen by 66%. Nobody knows that. It's sad that nobody knows that, because people got organized, made demands, and made it good politics for governments to respond. And back in 86, way back when, the volunteers generated 90 editorials on tripling the Child Survival Fund for vaccinating kids against measles and similar things. And I got a handwritten note from the head of UNICEF, the UN Children's Fund, saying, I thank you in my mind at least weekly, if not more often, for what you and your colleagues are accomplishing, but I thought I should do it at least once this year in writing. Imagine being part of an organization that's played a key advocacy role, no shots in arms, but the advocacy part, the lobbying for it, in a 66% decline in global child deaths. We all want to be part of something big and things that matter, make a difference.
Well, and it's one of those that says, like, without us, like, if you have to justify us, not to say like we've had great results, because some people are like, okay, well, is that good? Is it bad? Like, what's the average here? You said without us, 3 times more children would die globally. Like, that's a number that I don't think anyone's going to stand on the other side of.
Yeah, exactly.
You just said, like, we need your support because otherwise 3 times as many kids will die.
Yeah.
No one's going to be like, get rid of them.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's in a sphere that most people think is dirty and corrupt and something you want to stay away from. I know lots of folks who found a way to find some joy and some meaning and some purpose in that arena, which is, you could call it politics, you could call it advocacy, but it's kind of making a difference with your voice as a citizen, wherever you are.
Well, and there is a lot of, like, I mean, the division in our country is insane right now, but you'll never 100% agree with anyone. Like, not even yourself will you 100% agree with. So you can't expect that out of any of your politicians.
Yeah.
But no matter who wins your representative area, your country, your state, whatever it is, you could still find the things they do that you do like and advocate for them to continue doing them.
Yeah.
And on the other side, find the things that you're like, I don't think this is good, and either, try and find the justification for it or try to voice against it to say, like, this isn't as important as the other stuff we do.
Yeah. Great. Let me give you an example. When I'm coaching a group that's meeting with a member of Congress or Parliament who opposes their bill, I have them ask 3 questions. Question number 1, we know you don't support this bill. What would it take to change your mind? Now, you're listening for assignments. Question number 1, what would it take to change your mind? 2, could you say more about that? 3, why do you think that is? So it's actually a deep listening exercise. And I have a friend who was working to get a Republican and a Democrat in the US to lead on a House Climate Solutions Caucus. He asked, what would it take to change your mind? And the elected official said, well, if you could get the chambers of commerce on board. And he was going down to Florida from Pennsylvania. And he did. Miami Beach, Coral Gables, South Miami. And he comes back with the letters from the chambers of commerce. And the elected official says, well, if you could get the mayors on board. He's listening for assignments. And he did. He came back with letters of support from the mayors of all these cities and eventually came on board. But what would it take to change your mind? Listening for assignments and then delivering. It was a great example of that. And if I can, let me tell a related story. there's a volunteer. She's now on staff, but this story, she was a volunteer with Citizens Climate Lobby, CCL. And she said when she joined, she was suffering from what she called climate trauma. She would read Bill McKibben's book, Earth, and she would weep at home and she would weep at work. And then she joins CCL. And 18 months later, she's co-leading a workshop on getting relationships with members of Congress and editorial writers. And she says, our executive director says, we're betting the farm on relationships. Now go get a relationship with your member of Congress and editorial writer. And she said, how do you get a relationship with a member of Congress? And she says, some in the organization use the model of a work relationship. They use work as their model. And she said, I adore romance. I use romance as my model. And she goes this long thing. I'm going to try and remember the last thing she says. It's in the book, Reclaiming Our Democracy. She said, she goes to 20 congressional offices over 4 days. Going into their offices was hard. I had to let go of a lot of emotional baggage. I could no longer judge them or hold hostility in my heart toward them. I had to let go of my fear of climate change and my fear that they wouldn't listen to me. I had to center myself in love. Releasing fear and centering in love, this is sacred and profound work. She started at climate trauma and she ends up at sacred and profound, which is the transformational advocacy, that transformational journey. But she didn't act alone. She had a group. She got trained. She'd had breakthroughs. And then she had this experience as a result.
Well, and some of that is finding, what in your experience is helpful for you and what is just kind of a hindrance, because it's like, is crying at home and work helping you? Probably not. It might be a little cathartic, especially if the situation is very existential.
Yeah.
Where you're like, this is a global problem. Like, yes, but is the crying specifically helping the globe?
Yeah.
Like, well, no. Okay, well, that part has to go. Yeah. What can help? Like, well, talking to these members of Congress. Like, okay, well, if that can help, then I need to start doing that because I wasn't before.
And we need to find an organization that will guide us and not just help us sign another petition only.
Right. Well, especially when you say like 3% found it effective. Like, okay, well, do you want to gamble on 3%? Like,
exactly.
That's a pretty bad betting odds. If it's the lottery, It's fantastic. But if it's in a casino, it's terrible.
Yeah, exactly.
So when you ask these questions, like, what would it take to change your mind? I mean, have there been any times where they just say, like, I would not change my mind on this?
Well, here's the thing. Your goal at that moment isn't to change your mind. Your goal is to build a relationship and want them to want you to come back. And over time, we'll see if they say, there's no way well, okay, but you're my elected official. I'm your constituent. Let's hang out here. Could you say more about that? You're never going to do it. Tell me more. Why do you think that is? And you're not bashing, you're listening, which I think is really, really important, of course, in building relationships, which transformational advocacy is about, relational advocacy.
It seems like one of those hard things in a relationship, like where you have a hard line issue, where somebody says, like, I don't want to change my point of view on this, and you hold a different viewpoint.
Yeah.
Hearing like, I don't want to change my view is a little disheartening, because
yes.
I'd rather hear like, well, you need to change 90% of public opinion. Like, at least there I have a goal, even if it's very, very hard. Like, it's a goal.
Yeah.
As opposed to just like, no.
No way.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
So is there a way to like, obviously you're building the relationship and there's a lot of training that goes into this, but is there something to kind of keep you motivated to keep pushing through when you get just like no's?
Well, yeah. So let me give you an example. One of the things I talked about was if an organization has works to build community and has, for example, a monthly webinar with guest speakers Q&A. And I said inspiration. One part of the inspiration is they might have one or two people do what we call a grassroots victory, where they talk about not just yay, 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 we succeeded. No, no, it took us 11 phone calls to get the meeting, and the meeting was with the district director, and it was only after that we finally got in. So I really coach people. For example, rather than saying, we met with our member of Congress, it was a blast, we can't wait to do it again, everyone on the call is going, oh, they're an expert, I'm not an expert, they could do it, I could never do it. If you start with the reality, I'm thinking about a scenario where this actually happened. We worked to get our meeting with our elected official. It literally took 11 phone calls. Everyone around the country is going, yeah, I know this is really hard. But finally, on the 12th call, so when you're hearing others succeed, even though you're not yet, when the five of you write letters to the editor and yours isn't published, but one of the others is, you can feed off of that. And it is that you're not alone part. You're not acting on your own. You're in both maybe a local community and state, or in province or national community. And I think that's a really important thing. Let me say this one other thing. One of the things we train on, it's in the book, is the champion scale. My elected official is opposed. There's no use meeting with them. No, 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 no. You want to move opposed up to neutral. My member is neutral. My member is a supporter. I'm done. They're a supporter. No, 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 no. You want to move supporters up to being an advocate, or up to being a leader, or up to being a champion. And when I'm working with a group whose members opposed, one of the things I recommend is, well, in the US, in a congressional website, there's a list of all these news releases about things they've done that they're excited about. I would say, go read the news releases and find one that you actually like. They may have done 19 things and you hate 18 of them. Find the one that you actually like and write letters to the editor thanking them for their leadership on that, and hoping they can bring that same kind of leadership to your issue, where you're acknowledging them for something you actually agree with, and hoping they bring that leadership to your issue. Working to crack open the door. Oh, these guys aren't just talking to me, the six of them. They're talking to the whole community, whether it's 100 or 1,000 or 100,000 that read letters to the editor, kind of thing. So you're kind of speaking more broadly in the community, as you were alluding to, getting 90% support. Well, it's not exactly, but it's on the road.
Sure.
To doing that.
Well, and it's one of those that we live in a very fast-paced society, and people want that, like, I succeeded gratification really, really fast. And that, especially when you're dealing with difficult issues, is very hard. Like, you're going to have 11 failed phone calls that just didn't go anywhere. Yeah. But if someone in your larger group is succeeding, like, you are succeeding in a way.
Your
like,
team.
Yeah,
your
you're like, hey, we had a success this week. Exactly. That's a win. As a group, we had a win. Even though we had 90 failures, we had a win. Yeah. So, like, we're making progress.
Yeah, big time. Yeah. And so that's that, not working alone, and building local chapters and that kind of thing.
Well, yeah, and especially if you have, as a group, you're like, we have 6 major issues to cover. Like, one person trying to deal with 6 things is untenable.
Yeah.
Like, you just couldn't.
Now, I recommend that people focus, meaning it might be that your group is focused on poverty and there are a couple issues there, or climate change and there are a couple issues there. But I recommend that people focus and not flit from over there to over here to over here to over there. That can also make you a little nutty, because you need to get grounded. You end up being the mini expert to the elected official. There are thousands of issues. They can't know them all, but you can get yourself really grounded in one key area and be the resource they turn to because you're on these monthly calls with the guest speakers and Q&A, because you're involved in all these other areas of study and training. You're their go-to person in a lot of cases.
Yeah, and within any one large issue, there's going to be dozens and dozens of smaller things that can
Oh, big
always
time.
be improved.
Big time. Yeah.
Even if, like you said, you're just moving from supporter to advocate, it's a big move, but it's just one of the many issues in the large area that you're working
Yeah.
inside of.
Yeah. Yeah. Maybe I could tell you one more story about another activist. Her name is Maxine Thomas, and she lives in the state of Indiana. She has a lived experience of poverty. And she said to me, I have a heart for service, but I was clueless about advocacy, especially political advocacy. And she joined a group of others working to move out of poverty. And her group realized they had a story to tell. And they Google around for a group that could help them tell their story. And they find results and they join. And eventually, Maxine and two others get a scholarship to go to the Results Conference in Washington, D.C. She gets a scholarship, borrows luggage, goes to D.C. The night before her first ever meetings with her elected officials, she learns that the earned income tax credit was about to expire. And the earned income tax credit in 2020 was $3,100, and it went to working low-income families. And it really meant a lot to her family. She goes to this meeting and she says, she meets her senators, the first meeting, and she said, I didn't know I could come here and meet with you, someone who represents us and can do something. At the end of a full day of meetings, she said, I was euphoric. I was on this high and felt I was part of something revolutionary. She started it. I was clueless about advocacy, especially political advocacy. And she goes from clueless to I was euphoric. I was on this high and felt I was part of something revolutionary. Again, that's the transformation. It's available. I don't know what moves someone who's listening to this. I don't know what your issue is. It might be one of the ones I've mentioned. It might be something else, but find your issue. And, in the program notes, there's a form where you can let me know you'd like to be connected, and I'll help you get connected to one of these groups that offers transformational advocacy.
Well, and think about your mindset of that is moving to support this thing. Like, her family probably felt very supported having this tax credit, and that helped them to support her, and she grew. And eventually it turned around to where she could help to support the tax credit happening, which is like now you're influencing other people's lives in the same way that like you received support, you are now a supporter.
Exactly.
Just by saying like, hey, this is super valuable.
Yeah.
Like you're
Big
helping
time.
other people that are in the same situation you were at one point.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Very, very true. And we want that actually. I mean, we may shut ourselves down from it. We want it, but like if we open ourselves up to it, we feel it's not going to work. I'm going to be disappointed. No. If you find the right community, there won't need to be that disappointment. And we don't have to stuff it.
Fantastic. Well, I think this has been incredibly educational and I appreciate your time. Why don't you tell everyone where they can find the book and where they can find more from you other than just in the show notes?
Great. So the book is Reclaiming Our Democracy. The subtitle is Every Citizen's Guide to Transformational Advocacy, which we've been talking about. And reclaimingourdemocracy.com will show you a bunch of places where you'll be able to connect with the book. And then there's a participation form link also in the program notes where you could let me know that you'd like to be on the Civic Courage mailing list. That's my mailing list. That you'd like to be connected with a group that I've discussed, and maybe there are a couple others I haven't discussed. And if you actually have a speaking opportunity, I'm ready to go because I think this message needs to get out there, and I want to do it whenever I can.
Certainly. And I always encourage people, like, if you buy the book, please leave good reviews for the book because that helps other people find it organically. But in this case, if you have an issue you're very passionate about, like, this is your chance to kind of ask for more. This is our expert. Sam's here to help. So this is a time to really think about what's important to you and what you want to do with your influence. Sam, thank you so much for being here. Like I said, I've appreciated your time immensely.
Yeah, it's been a thrill. Thanks so much.
Remember the difference between transactional advocacy and transformational advocacy. Don't just sign a form and hope for the best. Make your voice heard. That's it for this week. Have a great week, a great weekend, and I'll see you all back here next week for another new episode where I'll be 1 year older officially. Until the next episode, pretty pleased to all those things that help the show grow, like rating, reviewing, liking, and subscribing. Remember, you can reach out to dumbenoughpodcast@gmail.com or on any of the social medias if you want to reach me personally. But most importantly, stay dumb.